Pretend it's 1978. You're a movie fan, and you're eagerly anticipating Brian DePalma's next film. You loved the 1-2 punch of Carrie and Obsession in 1976, appreciating Obsession for its Hitchcockian overtures, its pathos, and the psychological trauma of a lie. You loved Carrie, a frenetic and powerful modern horror film that balanced a gut-wrenching, relatable teen narrative with some of the most innovative filmmaking you'd seen. De Palma is an exciting director in the new horror space, and now his follow-up, The Fury, based on the popular book by John Ferris, looks like Carrie 2.0. Telepathic teens, but with a big studio budget this time, and big stars, Amy Irving, who shined in Carrie, getting her shot in the limelight as the lead, living legend Kirk Douglas as a former special ops commando on a revenge mission, indie darling John Cassavetes as the villain, and the musical genius behind Star Wars and Jaws, John Williams, writing the score. Psychological horror, cloak and dagger, corporate espionage action. This will be great. And that's actually what De Palma thought too, that this movie was a recipe for success. But when the film was released, it was destined to not be a hit. It's unfortunate that it was met with sort of a collective whimper. In Gene Siskel's review, he would say The Fury has plenty of violence and a lot of nothing else. The Fury has about 10 to 12 really great things going for it. None of which, I guess, really mesh well together. But what does work are a series of operatic set pieces that are standouts in De Palma's career. So join me as we probe the mind of The Fury, its director, its script, some of its more memorable moments, and let's celebrate this creative gem together.
For lovers of the shocking, the suspenseful, and the terrifying comes a new classic, The Fury.
The Fury is the story of two teenagers with telekinetic abilities. Gillian Belliver, played by Amy Irving, and Robin Sansa, played by Andrew Stevens, whose emerging and sublime talents are coveted by the mysterious Paragon organization, a malevolent government program masquerading as a school for the gifted. Paragon and its leader, Childress, John Cassavetes, plan to submit the teens to a desensitizing battery of tests and experiments in order to weaponize their powers. Both Robin and Gillian's ESP manifest in different ways. Robin has a perverse control over technology, whereas Gillian's purview is more biological, inflicting outpourings of spontaneous blood from her victims when interactions become tense or threatening. Gillian's rich mother enlists her in the school willingly, whereas Robin is forcibly separated from his unsuspecting father, Peter Sansa, Kirk Douglas, a dangerous former government spook and one-time colleague of Childress. Peter will stop at nothing to free his son, pursuing every avenue, including Gillian, who is bombarded with spontaneous clues, messages, apparitions of Robin's fate, as we come to find that the two are seemingly connected through their shared abilities. John Ferris, who wrote the novel, co-wrote the script with De Palma. Ferris, as an author, was a guy who constantly plugged away, but never achieved the mainstream success or recognition of his contemporary Stephen King. Though King did often offer generous blurbs of praise for Ferris's paperbacks, novels like Son of Endless Night and Minotaur. Ferris was incredibly prolific, but The Fury was really his only break into mainstream success, though he voiced his hope that The Fury was just the first of many films that would be adapted from his catalog. Sadly, he would end up waiting by the phone. Ferris wasn't a guy who rode the 80s horror novel train as a cash grab. In my opinion, he was a real maven of the macabre. His books, especially the Southern Gothic All Heads Turn as the Hunt Goes By, is praised by diehard fans of the genre as one of the best of the period. He even directed his own independent horror film, Dear Dead Delilah, all the way back in 1972, a cult horror film that had moderate success at drive-ins. And unlike Stephen King, who was handed directing duties because of his fame, and in a coke-fueled bender agreed to direct Maximum Overdrive, Ferris funded, directed, and wrote his own little oddity simply out of passion. I think he loved the movies, and not just as a means to garner fame and sales for his books, which is why I would assume he enjoyed working with De Palma and agreed to a myriad of changes to his novel, including the ending, which is obviously changed for the better. The finale to the movie is incredible, one of those must-see gore sequences. Explosive, you might say, and I'll leave you to watch it on your own. I won't spoil it in this video, especially since the conceit behind much of my work is to encourage people to watch some of these movies I talk about. But anyway, the point is the ending of the book was much less bombastic, but Ferris and De Palma agreed that on the big screen, something definitive and explosive was needed. In fact, the changes often feel like a deliberate move by De Palma to mine out of the story and to expand the elements that interested him most. which is probably why Kirk Douglas's international espionage storyline commands so much of the screen time, eschewing the book's opening, which describes the home life of Gillian Belliver in favor of a shootout on a beach in Israel in which Robin is kidnapped by Childress and Douglas is left for dead. In typical De Palma fashion, there are many layers to this moment. For one, the Middle Eastern terrorists are actually working on behalf of the United States government. Or maybe they are American agents in disguise, it's not clear, but we do know that they are tax-funded from this exchange.
You ain't the police, is you? Oh, well, I'm what you'd consider well-traveled, but I don't believe I've ever heard of you gentlemen.
We don't spend a dime on public relations.
As the agents attempt to break into Kirk's hotel and end his campaign of sabotage. Douglas escapes out the window. This is the second time we've seen Douglas shirtless, and we're only about 10 minutes in. Nice little action scene, I suppose. And before Douglas commandeers the apartment of three helpless Chicagoans to stage his next getaway, we hear an aside from this couch potato lamenting the state of politics in the Mideast.
The Hanafi Muslim sect continue their siege of 3 Washington buildings, even though one of their demands has already
Damn it. Did you hear that, Vivian? Now that's what I'm talking about.
See, he's commenting on what is a supposed terrorist attack, but before this, we just saw one that was a whole-cloth government op. We know this, but this poor citizen will never know, and apparently the news media doesn't either. This guy will go on to form assumptions and a worldview to some extent based on a lie, something completely fake. And I think De Palma might like you as a viewer to pause and think about just how much you really know about what's going on in the world. I devoted a great deal of time to addressing this aspect of De Palma's ideological bent as a filmmaker in my retrospective on his film Blowout, just 3 years later, where the director would take these anti-establishment, anti-CIA opinions to their logical extreme. But it's fun to see them in a sort of latent stage here. To add further De Palma intrigue and style, and to advance the idea that lies and manipulation are laundered through media, the entire orchestrated sabotage is filmed and then fed back to Robin for him to re-experience, in order to provoke a response, forcing him to relive this traumatic incident of a terrorist attack, a tragedy, in order that he ultimately do the bidding of his tormentors.
How's our boy Wonder?
Those films of his father's death have unleashed an incredible emotional force. Why, he's developing the power of an atomic reactor.
Is De Palma trying to say something about the idea that the government might weaponize public tragedies to provoke voter action? I'll let you decide. In the book, the Paragon Institute and Childress are a foil for our characters, a guiding element of the narrative, and Sansa's hunt for his lost child is an important B storyline, but much of the drama and intrigue of the book comes from the two teen characters and their special supernatural relationship. In fact, one of the more important concepts from the book, the idea that Gillian and Robin are two hyper-powerful beings that have been perpetually reincarnated throughout the ages, always drawn to each other, is totally dropped. Out of the 3 storylines vying for supremacy, it's Robin's storyline that ends up underdeveloped, and ultimately, he's sort of just a MacGuffin character. It's the 2 stories of the father on a mission and the young girl exploring her powers, respectively, that De Palma seems to have the most fun with.
Peter, I was lying before. Robin's not okay. He needs us now.
Look, it's too dangerous. People around me get killed.
Well, damn it, people around me get hurt too. I make them bleed. Robin can help me.
We're introduced to Gillian and her powers during a demonstration at her all-girls prep school by the visiting Paragon organization, who are demonstrating to the students some kind of pseudoscientific brainwave device.
We're converting the very low voltage alpha wave energy into electricity to run that train. Now that machine is called a magnetometer, and it records the fluctuations of the human...
It's all rather goofy and over-explained, but the idea of using your mind to power a toy train, a rather slight occurrence, not particularly impressive, is of course, in the hands of De Palma, a rather unique moment, in which he employs his signature split-focus diopter horizontally across the screen, creating a rather uncanny effect, forcing the perspective of the train's position in an impossible way, and juxtaposing it against Gillian's blank transfixed expression and the reaction of the startled witnesses. The train is a great device to help drive momentum towards the scene's climax, in which Gillian receives a strikingly violent vision. I think this is a fun referential device, the train, especially considering the importance of the train in film history as an object whose movement and momentum made such an impression in silent shorts like the Lumiere brothers' Arrival of a Train, or in Edwin S. Porter's The Great Train Robbery in 1903. De Palma has always been a student of cinema. Sometimes he's unfairly pegged exclusively as either some sort of cinematic pervert or as a knockoff wannabe Hitchcock. I'd like to quote from a great review from Armand White and his criticism of Noah Baumbach's documentary, De Palma. The anonymity of the film's questions leaves De Palma stranded. Instead of speaking artist to artist, he's forced to make a case for himself against unidentified questioners. Too much time is wasted on De Palma's defending his misunderstood movies and answering Philistine's charges about fame, sexism, and brutality. Aesthetics and political morality are rarely discussed in relation to De Palma's movies. Instead, shallow critics and film buffs concentrate on his borrowing Hollywood narrative, and so never appreciate him as a distinctive figure of late 20th century filmmaking. And it can't be understated the role De Palma had in crafting the idea of the psychic in popular culture. In his video on the many iterations of Carrie, the excellent YouTube essayist In Praise of Shadows made the great point that Sissy Spacek and De Palma in Carrie basically established what it looked like to use psychic powers, and that film has been used as a template ever since. De Palma does something similar here, but he elevates it, as the psychic powers in The Fury, especially when it comes to Gillian, are portrayed as a means to establish information, and it's all very cinematic. During Gillian's time at the Paragon Institute, she begins to interact with the house in a special way. Her extrasensory perception allows her to interpret a sort of liminal temporality, residues of a tumultuous past, linked to the house itself, like a haunting, but one she can only perceive because of her connection to Robin. The way that De Palma chooses to shoot and edit these moments is very impressive. Often rather than simply existing within the scene, sort of like A Christmas Carol where the characters are an unseen fly on the wall, De Palma chooses to shoot the reverse shots of Gillian, where she is meant to embody the POV of Robin in her disconnected environment. But he uses the same vocabulary as you would had she been in the same location in the scene. Rian Johnson used the same trick in The Last Jedi, where the shot-reverse shot structure of the conversation between our two leads are filmed in different locations, but as if they were together. Also, note the subject matter is a conversation between two teenagers, essentially, with telekinetic powers. So I guess we can guarantee that Rian Johnson has seen The Fury. Let's take a look at Gillian's first experience with these visions. She's walking up the stairs with Charles Durning, one of the caretakers at the house, when all of a sudden, she's reeling from an assault on her senses as she sees Robin on the same staircase, in a different time, being pursued and falling out of a window. The sense we're given is of a panorama of experience, as if this vision has cascaded over her and completely enveloped her senses. In addition to the filmmaking, Amy Irving and John Williams bring their A-game to this movie, and Williams' score is an especially striking accompaniment to these moments, often stressing the drastic cuts in the beats of his score. Irving is also called upon to express a gamut of emotions, especially prolonged feelings of anguish and horror as she witnesses these jarring events, experiences which lead her to lash out mentally and leave her victims a bloody mess. I think it's hard to miss the obvious overtones inherent in the story of a young girl's awakening to her powers being denoted by the appearance of blood. Charles Durning even mentions it as it relates to Gillian's abilities and the other women at the school.
Esther, Kristen, Lorraine, if you girls are into your monthlies, I don't want you around when Gillian is testing.
Are you serious?
I'm very serious.
Gillian's power to psychometrize is spontaneous. She creates an enormously powerful electromagnetic field. Almost everyone exposed to it will bleed.
The Fury is a profoundly sexual movie, but not in the typical De Palma style. There's nothing prurient or lascivious about it. No prostitutes, no lurking POVs as we see in later movies like Body Double or Dress to Kill. It's all very primal. If there is voyeurism, it's all psychosexual. The images of a young girl in a nightie exploring a young boy's room, gleaning insights about him. The young man, Robin, on the onset of his powers, coinciding with an awakening of violence and strength. Robin, with the onset of his increasing abilities, i.e. the introduction of a sex drive, becomes profoundly frustrated, jealous, taking out his anger on society, veins pulsating. The Fury, if we think about the title a little bit, could be read as a description of the phenomenon of the abilities portrayed in the film. analogs to the Shining or scanners, like a colloquialism for the telekinetic energy. But it could also describe the sort of latent anxiety and pent-up energy of all the characters. They all fight for control. Kirk's Peter Sansa and Cassavetes' Childress fight for control of Robin. The Paragon Institute seeks to control Gillian and keep her locked up in the house. Peter uses Hester, his on and off girlfriend, also mole within the operation, to help him get access to Gillian and to use her powers to find his son. The two young prodigies never meet, Robin being too far gone in his rage, but they do have this sort of agitated scratch that reoccurs simultaneously. They are both compelled by some force to connect. The scratch is something you could associate with a nervous fidget, an anxiety, an anticipation between the two, for something that is never consummated, as the adults in the film seek to retool them towards their own purposes, manipulating and sabotaging the coupling of the next generation, perverting their natural connection. The standout sequence in the film is the scene in which Amy Irving escapes the Paragon Institute. In this moment, all diegetic audio drops out of the scene, leaving Williams' score to do all the heavy lifting. The scene starts off with a feeling of elation as Gillian makes her getaway. There are even notes of humor reflected in the music as well, as Hester, played by Carrie Snodgrass, Gillian's only ally in Paragon, intentionally trips a guard to enable Gillian's safe passage. The sequence then switches to a sort of action momentum as the camera dollies with Gillian to show her picking up speed, in conjunction with a new threat, a car manned by two Paragon goons rushing to head her off. But, surprise, Kirk Douglas is here. I love this dolly in and focus on his gun. And bang, he takes out Gillian's pursuer. Notes of triumph in Williams' score that merge with a strong string section indicating impending danger, then tragedy, as Hester is struck dead by the automobile and thrown bloody into a windshield. Then, William amps up the leitmotif of the film's main theme, along with pounding drums to indicate danger, as there is another unseen guard, seemingly returning from being off-premise, and Kirk is too overcome with grief, having gotten Hester killed, to notice. So many emotions in beautiful slow motion. This kinetic cut, close-up to Hester's dead body. Kirk mustering all his strength and rage. Just in time, he's able to act fast, delivering 3 shots. No gunfire sound effect. Just punctuation by Williams. Beautiful, impressive stuff. Let's not forget Pauline Kael's review. If you don't like The Fury, you just don't like movies. I think it's fair to judge Kael's praise as a little over the top, and I have the feeling that she knew there was just a lot to admire about DePalma, and therefore exaggerated a little bit to prove a point. There is a lot of disjointedness in The Fury, mainly in the script, and as I talked about before, a sort of lopsidedness in the storyline as we spend a lot of time on Kirk Douglas' subterfuge. I think DePalma realized this, and he does something interesting. He repeats a lot of moves in the camera, like these 2 conversations, one between Hester and Gillian, and one between Peter and Robin, where the camera moves back and forth on a half-circle dolly track, back and forth between the 2 conversations. And it's not a repeat like he's out of ideas, but what De Palma's doing, I think, is creating a recurring cinematic language to bridge the multiple subplots of the movie by giving the film a sort of unified language. This is a movie that at times really feels like a grand cinematic display, like it's a De Palma sandbox, a way for him to show what he can really do with some money. And I think that's the real source of its creative charm. The Fury. It's a great movie.
20th Century Fox presents a Frank Yablans presentation.
Should recognize your old man?
The Fury. The Fury, a Brian DePalma film. An experience in terror and suspense.